This is Six Tackles with Gus, with Matthew Thompson and Gus Gould.
Hello and welcome to Six Tackles with Gus on a very sombre week for rugby league. It is with heavy heart that many rugby league fans prepare for the weekend's action. Round 4 coming up following the very, very sad passing of one of the absolute greats of rugby league, the great John Sattler. Having left us at the age of 80. We'll start the podcast today by paying tribute to a tough man, but a great, great man. Phil Gould, welcome. So sad. I know he was 80 and he hadn't been well, but there's a real sense of loss around this. We lose people every year, and it's always sad. But wow, I mean, you're talking about one of the best of the best here in John Sattler.
Yeah, they all hurt as we all get older. Obviously, people tend to, they all pass away. And I personally, over the last couple of years, I've had a number of players that I played with and against in my era, passing away, and it's always very sad. And then you have a man of the stature of John Sattler passes away, and everyone feels it. I think our game took a giant breath on when the news was announced this week that he'd finally passed away, and we go back and remember his career with great fondness. Not only his career, but he himself, who was a wonderful man. I had the pleasure of meeting him a number of times, but he was certainly an iconic name in our game and came from an iconic era, particularly for the South Sydney club. Their greatness back in the 60s and early 70s was one of their better eras. They won premierships in 67, 68, 70 and 71. They played in the grand final in 69, that famous grand final where Balmain beat them, but he captained them in those 5 grand finals, of which they won 4. He was born in Tellarah in 1942, which is a little town, I think, up near Raymond Terrace up there in the Newcastle area. And his parents moved to Curry when he was about 12. John himself didn't take up rugby league until he was about 16. He was a late starter. And then in 1962, he played against Great Britain. He represented Newcastle and played against Great Britain in a touring team. The touring team used to come out and play against all the regional sides. And he sort of made a name for himself in that game because England were a very tough side, and he was a young fella. And the next year he signed up with South Sydney in 63. By 67, he was their first grade captain, and he led them through that wonderful era. And, of course, the famous story of John Sattler is breaking his jaw in the first couple of minutes of a grand final and playing the whole game, which they went on to win.
Yeah. Look, the broken jaw thing is synonymous with John Sattler, but I did want to highlight that there was a lot more to his career than that. And you've mentioned the grand final victories, having captained South to 4 grand finals. I mean, that is the absolute elite of the elite. He captained Australia. He played 4 tests for Australia, 3 as national captain, played for both New South Wales and Queensland back in the days before the current Origin rules, where it was essentially a residence game.
Yeah.
But certainly his toughness was what defined him as a footballer. And I think one of the other things, too, that defined him, and I'm just sort of reading a lot of the press and the coverage of his great career and great life, is he was at the forefront of the South Sydney marches, you'll remember. He was up there on the steps of the town hall, talking about his passion for the club and urging the game to allow his beloved South Sydney back in. So even though he hadn't played for 20-odd years or 25 years, he was a passionate South man right through until the end.
Very staunch, and it was one of the great things that I did. My last year as a player, I got to play with South Sydney for 12 months, and I met all those great players. You know, your McCarthys and your Coots and your Sattlers, and we were, of course, coached by George Piggins, and they were a very, very tight group, very thick amongst themselves. And some years later, when South Sydney were kicked out of the comp and George ran the campaign to get them back in, and we all supported him, those fellas were still there, shoulder to shoulder, and fighting the good fight for South Sydney. And John Sattler was a marvellous man. Like, as a footballer, and understand, this was a very tough and violent era. John Sattler himself was sent off 15 times in his career. I mean, that was just part and parcel of the game back then.
But you wouldn't blink at 15 send-offs back then.
No, well, you did 30-week suspension. If you did 15 suspensions nowadays, if you had 15 send-offs nowadays, you'd be run out of the country. But it was a very, very tough and brutal era. And he wasn't a big man physically. He was kind of like a lock forward. He had a passing game. He had skills. He could step. He could run. and he ended up in the front row, and he wasn't, by front rower standards, a big man at all, but extremely tough. They tell the story that in the grand final, when he was hit by a bloke called John Buckley in the first few minutes, and it broke his jaw in two places, and he got his teammates around him. He said, don't let them see that I'm hurt. And then during the first half, a lot of the other South Sydney forwards were pushing him out of the way to have a run because they didn't want him running the ball. And he stood up at halftime. He said, if anyone does that again, you're in trouble. He said, just let me play. He said, I don't want them knowing that I've got a broken jaw. And he even gave a speech. He accepted the J.J. Gilton and Shield after the game and gave a speech with his broken jaw before being rushed off to hospital. And I think that cost him a tour. I think that jaw cost him a tour with the Kangaroos that year. Certainly playing for Australia.
He made a speech after it.
Yeah. There's pictures of him with the J.J. Gilton Shield and getting chaired off the field, and then they had to make a speech and head off on a victory lap too. I mean, you couldn't. I broke my jaw in a game once, and I don't think I'd be running a victory lap after the game with it. Extremely tough man, but they were such a tight knit group, which is what happens with football clubs when you have a great era. Those fellas are friends for life, and there is a real bond amongst those old Rabbitoh mates. And when George Piggins was fighting the good fight, they were always around. It was great to have them around the club. Even when I played there just for that 1 year, it was a marvellous time in my life. But George Piggins, such a wonderful man, and all those great players were around. And John Sattler was a major part of that. He was their captain.
So I'm sure you've seen this. I want to show Gus this photo, and we'll put it up too for people watching us on the vodcast. Now, this is the famous shot. Now, you talk about John Sattler not being a big bloke. He's running down the streets of Redfern here with Eric Sims in the middle, and there's Bob McCarthy on the end. Now,
doesn't he look like Scott there?
Mate, it's freakish.
Yeah.
He's wearing his boots, so's Bob McCarthy, and Eric Sims is running without any shoes on.
Yes,
and I read today that back then they didn't have runners. No. So you either wore your boots or you didn't wear anything.
Yeah, and it was mufti. You wore whatever was in your closet. Everyone trained in different jerseys. I think.
But what I was going to say, I mean, he might not have been a big man, but what a professional! Look how fit he is.
Oh, mate, he was always dapper, always physically well presented. But that picture there in particular is the one I look at and I say, I see Scott Sattler. In that picture straight away.
They're chips off the old block.
Yeah.
And I want to mention Sats. Look, I've been great mates with Sats for 20 years now. We first worked together many years ago covering under-20s rugby league at Fox. This is another lifetime ago. And we worked together for many years on the Queensland Cup. When I was sort of doing a bit of NRL and a bit of Queensland Cup, I'd fly up on the weekends and call it with Sats, and we've become great friends since. And he's often sort of told me stories about John, how he owned the pubs over the years. And geez, I know how much you're hurting, Sats, and I'm thinking of you, as is everyone else. And rugby league aside, he sounds like a hell of a bloke, John Sattler. The way, the leader of that family. They had a really close relationship, Scott and John. And I know how much he loved his grandkids. So it's just tragic on that.
Go online and look up John Sattler images down through the years. And try and find me one where he's not beautifully dressed, where his hair's not done, where he doesn't look immaculate. Go and find an interview of John Sattler where he doesn't speak well, where he's not supportive of someone. He's never critical of anyone. He was just one of them really old-fashioned gentleman-type people, and softly spoken. And and you worked with him, you know him. But it just belies the man and the era that he came through. And all those blokes they're all very much the same. Off the field, they were just great people. On the field, obviously fiercely competitive, and as I say, it was a violent era. It was the era where I fell in love with the game. 1967, when South went on that 5-year run, I'm like 9 years of age, and I was a Dragon supporter. And luckily, Dad, we'd get to go maybe to 1 or 2 games a year live and watch. Back in those days, it was hard for parents to go take kids to the football and that. When I was old enough to do it myself, we went every weekend. But that was, for me, the era where I fell in love with the game. There was no football on TV. Every now and then you might get a black and white replay on TV. TV was black and white back then. And I remember at our cricket presentations at the end of the year, the highlight of our cricket presentations when we were kids was watching a reel-to-reel replay of the grand final from the previous year. That was the first you would have seen it, because there was just no television. So, and whatever television you saw of rugby league was in black and white. So to physically go to the game, with your dad and see the colour see the colours, the jerseys, the colours of the fans and the atmosphere. That's what you fell in love with. And you sort of dreamed, oh, yeah, I'd love to do this one day, not ever thinking that you would. But South Sydney were the gun side back then. And as I say, more than any other team in the competition. They've won more premierships. They're a foundation club. They were around right from the start. It was an absolute travesty that they were kicked out of the competition when they were, and thankfully put back in, which has made the competition better. And John Sattler, there may be, there's no bigger names anyway.
He's the heart of that club. So look, there's some great coverage in both the Nine Press and also the News Limited Press today. You should read that. But one of the stories I love was Bob McCarthy was quoted in our Sydney Morning Herald here in Sydney today about how there was this lunatic on the field, John Sattler. But after the game, he'd sit down with all the fans and he'd talk to all the elderly. Old Ellie ladies there about the cats and dogs, and while they were all on the drink, he was a teetotaler for the most of his life. So that'll be tricky. He'd be sitting with the punters having a yarn. Like, he's the nicest bloke. Yeah.
Very dapper, very always.
And Scott is too, actually. I've got to say.
Yeah, always impeccably dressed and impeccably behaved. A real role model. And as I say, they came out of a extremely tough era, a tough economic era for the country, and tough times, and people worked hard and. They all had jobs. They weren't full-time footballers. They all had jobs. And
do you think that's why there's such a great sense of loss about this? Because of John Sattler's connection to that era?
It will happen with all our great players. Like I felt the Arthur Beetson one in particular, and all the great players. But I've had some great mates that have passed away in the last couple of years that I played with and played against and knew very well through football over the years. And you don't get to see them as much as you'd like to these days. You don't get to see much at all. They move on with their life, but it takes you back to that time. And when you play rugby league, when you play in this environment, you form a very special bond with these people that, you mightn't see them for 10 years, but as soon as you do, the conversation picks up where it was 10 years ago, and it all feels the same. Like you can get around with blokes that you played with 40 years ago, and it feels like none of us, we look older, but we don't feel any older. Once you're all together, it's a great feeling.
Older. Yeah. Look, just to sort of finish off our tribute here, and they'll continue across the weekend. And Souths have announced that they're going to wear a specially designed jumper that reflects the jumper that John Sattler wore in those famous images of the grand final, where he had half the rabbit torn off of his jumper. So the logo's been redesigned to reflect that. They're going to wear that this weekend. And I don't know why I've never really thought about this, but just to wrap it up, John Sattler and Scott Sattler, father and son, both have iconic grand final moments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know why I've never given that any thought.
I remember...
It's freakish, isn't it?
I remember Scott Sattler, I think he might have been playing for the Gold Coast, broke his jaw in a game and played out the whole game with it. Not that he ever got the publicity, obviously, but, Scott had an iconic moment in the 2003 grand final for Panthers against Roosters, where he ran down Skinny Byrne in a vital part of the game, wet night, and put him out over the sideline. It's an iconic tackle in grand final history, and John was a proud father. That was the most proud thing in John's life, was what Scott had achieved in that time. He very rarely, we never talked about his own career or rested on the laurels of that. It was about being a dad again and everything that Scott had achieved, and Scott made him very proud. So, but none of us are going to live forever, mate. We all go eventually, and it's very, very sad when we lose these great players.
Sats, I'm thinking of you, mate, and to Beck, your wife, and to Jack and Olivia, your children, and John's other grandkids. Our deepest condolences. There's another sad bit of news in rugby league, and I guess a toiling player from the 90s has passed overnight. Kyle White, who was a former Canterbury player. Yep,
I knew Kyle. I coached Kyle in his very, very early days. He had a brother, Josh White, was a halfback.
Yeah.
They're both good footballers. Kyle played with Canterbury Bulldogs. He played with Western Suburbs. He went over to England. He played with Workington. He came back and played with Illawarra Steelers. He went back to England and played with Widnes. Probably played 100 first-class games in his career. He too wasn't a big man, not very tall, quite solid, but a brutal player.
I remember him playing for West.
We nicknamed him Killer Kyle White. Killer Kyle White. he too had a little bit of problem with the judiciary.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. His tackling style, he started at the chin and worked up.
You've had a few of them over the years.
Yeah, but, again, sad.
Very sad.
Yep.
Our condolences to his family as well. It's a somber start to the podcast today. We'll come back with all the usual stuff, but just to end this little section, a reflection from the late, great John Sattler on one of the most heroic efforts ever seen on a rugby league field.
It sounds silly and it sounds gruesome, but I pushed my jaw up into my mouth guard and I could hold it without any pain. And when I tackled or made a tackle, I'd lose control of it, but I could do it again and it wasn't causing me pain. But after the game, when everything just cooled down and the reality hit, it was terrible.
No.
That's the rule.
No. Dear.
It's a segment all of rugby league's talking about. Yes, no. 5 points for Gus.
Who's talking about it?
Everyone.
No one.
Everyone. This is all people want to talk to me about. How good is that new segment of yours? Let's go through the 5 points here. At the top, now you got to go thumbs up or thumbs down because the sound effect's the most important part. Melbourne will miss the finals this year.
No. They'll be right.
Yeah?
Yeah, they'll play finals.
Okay. At the end of his career, Tommy Turbo will be Manly's best ever player. Oh, actually, Jordan's written the questions today. Jordan, you forgot Bob Fulton. At the end of his career, Tommy Turbo will be Manly's greatest ever fullback.
Wait, you've changed the question.
Yeah.
Greatest ever fullback.
Editorial on the run, you see. That's what I'm saying.
Mate, I don't like playing. No, I'm giving that a
no.
No. I'll tell you why. Because I don't like comparing players from eras.
Okay.
All right? Fellas like Graham Eadie and Brett Stewart had marvellous careers. I do remember, though, when Tommy was just making his debut, just trying to break his way into that Manly side, he was playing on the wing and Brett Stewart was still playing fullback. And I remember in commentary, we were sitting on the panel after the game and Tommy had played a game, he'd scored a try, and I said Manly's next great era will be when Tom Trjobevic moves to fullback. Now, he's been dogged by injury and he probably needs to play the rest of his career, hopefully injury-free, and get some runs under the belt. He needs to win some premierships, but
Gus.
I don't think there's any greater talent that's ever played for Manly, but I don't want to be voting him as their greatest ever player or fullback.
Gus. Brett Stewart was a fine player. This bloke's got Brett Stewart covered. But I never saw Graham Eadie because I'm too young.
They were different players. Well, mate, we respect the past.
Of course, I'm not asking you to differentiate between.
I'm not about to denigrate players from the past, and it's like this immortal argument we had last week.
It wasn't an argument; it was a discussion.
In good time.
So no, but not because you don't rate Turbo.
I think Turbo today, and I've said this a number of times, is the greatest attacking force in the game of rugby league today. He is the greatest attacking force in the game of rugby league.
He's a difference.
Without a doubt.
He was a difference last week.
He's taken over from Billy Slater on that mantle. I rated Billy Slater the greatest attacking force during his career. He was the one that you had to contend with the most. The thing about Billy Slater was when you lined up in defence, Billy Slater could be over there behind Cameron Smith and then he would pass the ball, he'd be inside Cooper Cronk, and then Cooper Cronk would dummy to a bloke and give the ball to someone else, and Billy Slater would be inside him, and then the ball would go wider, and Billy Slater would get it out there and play a 2-on-1 on the winger. So you had to defend Billy Slater 4 times in the one play. It was like they had
3 of them.
Yeah, 3 extra players because he had the speed to be in all sorts of areas. He was the greatest attacking force in the game. And I think the greatest attacking force in the game today is Tom Trjobevic.
So why is he the greatest attacking force ahead of someone like Tedesco, for instance, or Munster?
He's got more to his game than Tedesco. He's a different type of player to Munster. Munster's a great attacking force, obviously, but Tommy has a number of strings to his bow. His running game, his passing game, his physicality. He's a big man. People don't realise how big he is. His speed, his ability to make players miss, his sense of timing, his sense of where to turn up. in games. And over a period of time, you get to see patterns in his play and things that he looks for. There was a try he scored the other night against Parramatta where I said he came from the other side of the field, raced around, could sense a quick play the ball close to the line, and come tearing onto a ball and ran over 2 forwards to score a try. Now, I've been seeing Tommy do that since he was a kid, but it's become a part of his makeup and he senses it. So, he's very different to Tedesco's a workhorse. Tedesco is just like having an extra player on the field for the amount of work that he gets through every week. But Tedesco's not the attacking force or the threat that Tommy is. And Tommy's a threat in so many different ways. Munster has his kicking game, he has his passing game, and he's got his uncanny step and dummy. But he doesn't have all the strings to his bow that Tommy has. Tommy doesn't do a lot of that either. They're different players. But if I'm coaching against another team, Tom Trjobevic would be the one that strikes most fear into me. He would keep me awake.
Well, I'm going to make up another yes, no question. You'll have 6. If Turbo plays for New South Wales this year, they'll win the Origin. Yes.
Yeah. How many fullbacks will we have in the team?
They're all fullbacks.
Tedesco, Latrell Mitchell,
yep.
Tommy Trjobevic,
yep.
Wali'i.
Speaking of the New South Wales team, our man Jordan, he's getting very dangerous territory here. You're going to have to think about what you write for these questions, mate. If the New South Wales team was picked today, Bulldogs cult hero Jacob Carraz would be in it. Yeah, get him in.
He's leading the Dally M's.
I know, he might win the Dally M. What price Jacob Carraz before a ball's kicked?
What a great kid.
Is he a good kid?
Great kid.
Geez, a good player.
Oh. Yeah, he is wholehearted. Yeah, he is. It's funny, because he was actually a Belmore Junior, Bulldog Junior, and before my time, but he'd actually signed a contract to go to the Cowboys, and a development contract or just an incentive contract. When he was younger, he got identified by a Cowboy talent scout, and he went up there, but COVID hit.
Right.
There was no lower grade or development football, so he came back home. That talent scout then moved from the Cowboys to Newcastle Knights. And so the talent scout rang up again and said, well, come to Newcastle Knights. So he went to Newcastle Knights, and his deal was sort of staggered, sort of like an incentive deal into a development contract into maybe a lower tier top 30. And again, COVID hit the following year, so there was no football. So he was sort of training but not playing, training, not playing, not training, not playing. So he'd gone 2 years without football, and then because of his contract, he suddenly found his way into the top 30. Well, the first grade coach is looking for forwards, and he's got this kid, Carraz, he hasn't seen play for 2 years. He's never seen him play. The talent scout said, I think he's a good player. But the coaches said, we need forwards. If we need to move someone, move him. So his manager came and said, this kid's a Belmore Junior. I'd never seen him play. Said, this kid's a Belmore Junior. I did some homework on him.
Didn't you have a heap out and you got a game? Like you had
Lebanese heritage, yeah. So he came down to us on I'll tell you what he signed for. He signed for $40,000. He signed with us. And I remember walking into training at Christmas time, so he signed late. So I think January might have been his first session. And I went to training, and I'm sitting there in the heat, and I'm watching them train, and this big gangly thing goes loping past, and I said, who the hell's that? I said, that's that boy from Newcastle, Carraz. I said, that's him. He said, yeah. I said, wow. I said, he's going to make me look a genius. I'd never seen him play. Anyway, right from the time he started to play, he was a ball runner, and they couldn't contain him, and he had big, long, gangly features and strong runner. And anyway, we ran into COVID and injury problems early last year, and we were playing Broncos, and we had to get a couple of players qualified, and I think he and Billy Slater made their debut. They weren't anywhere near the top 30, and he was the best player on the field.
He went good
for 50 minutes. He got cramps then and went off, and we lost. But while he was on the field, and so I immediately renewed his contract and signed him up, and and I'm going to have to renew it and sign him up again, I suppose.
Well, the great news is, congratulations, Jacob. You're making a State of Origin debut this year. He just fell off the lounge. Michael Jordan is the greatest athlete of all time. Oh!
I'm going to give that a yes. Look, that's... No, I'm going to give that a yes.
No. I thought you'd regret that.
Greatest athlete. Yeah, well, who are?
Well, look, the reason I've asked that question is because I heard something this morning I wanted to bring up here. It's been revealed that during his career, Michael Jordan earned $3.3 billion He's clearly the richest athlete ever. In fact, you could combine LeBron and Cristiano Ronaldo and he's still made more.
Yeah.
Good coin.
Phenomenal. And he'll be continue to earning until he dies. I mean, that's, his achievements in that game are just phenomenal. In what's obviously a very competitive and.
You watched the doco?
Oh yeah, I did.
How good is that doco?
I read his books as a young coach.
Right.
When I was a young coach, I read books on all the greats and in different sports and that sort of thing. And I actually gave some quotes of Jordan to our attacking coach Chad Randall. We were just talking about football one day, and I brought up a couple of Michael Jordan things that I'd read about him, and he rang me up and asked me if I could send him the quotes or the book where it came from, which I did. But it was one of the lessons I learned very early in my coaching career to help players about their role and responsibility to the team. And Michael Jordan, I can't remember what book it was, but there was a passage there where he wrote about how long's basketball? 4 12-minute quarters or something, 4 15-minute quarters? 12s? 4 12s, 48 minutes. He said, in that 48 minutes that I'm on the basketball court, he said, I only actually spend about 4 minutes either with the ball in my hand or directly defending the man with the ball. He said, such a low percentage of the game is actually with me with the ball in my hands or defending the bloke that's got the ball in his hands, right, when you add it all up. So
that's interesting.
There's 44 out of the 48 minutes where I'm off, what he calls off the ball. He said, it's what I did with those 44 minutes that made me a champion. What he did off the ball, to be in a position to get the ball in a better position, to be to get it to defend the ball. So it was kind of like in a game of football, you'll come off with your stats. You've made 10 runs or you've made 15 tackles or what have you. If I actually added up the time of that in an 80-minute performance, you've probably done about 6 or 7 minutes actual work with the ball in hand or tackling the man that's got the ball. So you're going to spend the vast majority of your game, 90% of your game, without the ball, away from the ball. And it's what you do in that 90 minutes that will determine whether or not you're a good player or a valuable team member or whatever you do. And we call it off the ball. Your off the ball contributions, your team-based actions, your sacrifices that you'll make, because that's going to determine if you're in position when we need to give it to you, or you're in position when they're going to be dangerous, or you're in position to help out with a play or to chase. And a lot of the time you'll chase or do things and not get any recognition for it. But the time you're not there, people will see that you should have been there. So we came up with this mentality, and this is early in my coaching days, around our responsibility off the ball, not with the ball, our responsibility off the ball. And it became very much a part of our origin mentality. It became very much a part of our club mentality. And I think why, we were able to produce a lot of really elite and representative class and good first grade class talent because mentally they understood their obligation during the game. And it's now part and parcel of the makeup of the professional footballer. But I'm going back 30 years, and it was Michael Jordan that sort of gave me that inspiration as well. And I'd never heard anyone talk about that. It's certainly never been raised with us in football during my time as a player, but it really made sense, and it really then gave you an obligation to be there just in case.
You always talk about that. That's a great coaching philosophy now, isn't it?
Well, it's the reason why we signed Reid Marnie. It's the reason why I was very keen to sign Reid Marnie, because we get the luxury of watching games from the grandstand all the time. People sitting at home who watch, some people watch 100% of their football on TV. You don't get an overall view of the game. You're only getting what the camera is showing you. So we get to sit up high all the time and can see what's happening. I'm never watching the ball in a game of football, whether I'm watching it on replay or live at a game. I'm never actually watching the ball. I'm watching away from the ball to see what the movement is and what's happening, and whether or not there's something there you can exploit or something there we need to improve, or where the option. So I don't look at what happens. I look at what could have happened, and can we recreate that? Can we recreate that scenario and take advantage of it? Now, all coaches are doing that these days, so you haven't got the advantage that we probably had back then. But off the ball became a very big part of our vocabulary. And your commitment there. And Reid Marnie is one of the great off-the-ball players in our game. The work he does off the ball, one of the greatest I saw was Jonathan Thurston.
I was just going to ask that. Yeah. Who are the best you've seen? Who's the best you coached?
Jonathan Thurston. bloke called Luke Ricketson at the Roosters was a phenomenal off-the-ball player. Terry Lamb was a phenomenal off-the-ball player long before it was a mentality, you know. Jonathan Thurston was one of the greatest I've seen. I saw him play a Friday night football game at Suncorp Stadium. He played for Cowboys against Broncos 2 days after he'd played in an epic Origin game. And I wish we'd have had GPS back then, because the kilometres he did that night, not just to get involved or save tries or to back up and score tries or to chase kicks or whatever. The number of times he was there but never actually got into the play. You never saw him actually do anything, but he was there just in case he was needed. And every time he was needed, he was there. And Reid Marnie was one of those players that impressed me. Not just all the work he did out of dummy half and all the tackles he made, but the other 90% of his game was phenomenal. Chasing kicks, support play, back up, fielding kicks in the in goal, you know, diffusing tries, saving tries. He's just a phenomenal player.
Gee, I'm glad I asked that question about Michael Jordan. See, this is the wonderful thing about this podcast. You can go one way and next thing you know, you're going down another path. Last one. We've got a little bit of vision here to show for our vodcasters. Phil Gould will be a late call-up for the Masters at Augusta this year. Talk me through this chip shot yesterday.
Well, that was on the 15th hole at New South Wales Golf Club. We were playing in the Inglis Charity Day. Yvonne O'Keefe, formerly Yvonne Sampson, who is the
credit for the video,
the ambassador for Inglis. She just happened to be there on that hole. I was playing with Braithen Astor and a couple of other gentlemen, and we were playing in a 4-ball Ambrose. So we were just short of the 15th green, and I was first to play and chipped it in from about 30,
if you
40
don't
metres
mind.
away. And Bonnie caught it on film, so it was very funny.
So you didn't rehearse it
No.
50 times?
No, didn't.
That was a spontaneous one.
If you go there, there's
well
only
done.
one did.
Good to see you back on the golf course. How'd your team go?
We won.
Did you?
Yeah.
How many under? 40?
11 under, which was pretty good.
That's a good effort at New South Wales.
It was pretty windy too, so yeah.
I saw Gary Player was out there.
He was, yeah. He was on the putting green. I actually met Gary Player 30 years ago at a Pro-Am at the Lakes. Was introduced to him, but he was there yesterday as guest of Inglis, and we actually bumped into him halfway round. Braithen Astor carried on like a child. He had to get photos with him and all that sort of thing. So they became real fanboys on the thing. But he was lovely. I mean, I don't know how much golf he played. I think he's nearly 90 now, Gary. But
is he really?
Yeah, but he walked around with his wedge and his putter, and I think he just chipped and putted. I don't know how many other shots he played. It was quite windy actually. You
should have given him a chipping lesson.
I think he could give me a lesson.
You know what I remember about Gary Player? You talk about back in those days. Of course, you remember this. I remember when I was really young. Remember the old skins games they used to have here?
Yeah.
Well, they played the Lakes a lot. Greg Norman was always there, and Gary Player played a bit.
Yeah.
Big coin.
30 years ago, when I first saw him, we were on the putting green at the Lakes. We were playing in a Pro-Am, and it was a shotgun start, so everyone was going to start together. And he was on the green putting on his own, and people were sort of scared to go over and talk to him. He was just practicing his putting, and he saw a young bloke there putting. He went straight over and started to give him a lesson.
Oh.
Right, and so he was giving this kid a lesson. And in the end, there was a crowd around him as he was giving a putting lesson to this young bloke on the putting green. So here we are 30 years later. He must be nearly 90. I go out to New South Wales Golf Club, and there's a little bit of drizzly rain. It's quite cool, and they're on the putting green, and Gary Player is like 15 yards away from me. And he saw a young lady down in the warm-up nets, warming up to have a hit. He walked down and started giving her a lesson on how to hit her iron shots.
Jeez, I need him.
Yeah, so he gives back. He's obviously a great teacher as well.
Great to see you back on the golf course, Gus. We'll get you out to Stonecutters Ridge shortly. Let's talk about a couple of serious matters. Michael Chammas revealing in the Nine Press and on 9 News last night that the Dragons are going to ask Anthony Griffin to reapply for his job for next season.
It could be the beginning of the end. The Dragons have informed Anthony Griffin that they will begin interviewing coaches for 2024 and beyond. Now, Griffin, he is contracted for another season with the club, and there are doubts over whether he should continue. Now, the three names that are being discussed are Ben Hornby, Jason Riles and Dean Young.
Now, without talking about Anthony Griffin specifically, is it unprecedented that a coach has been asked to reapply for his job? I can't remember that happening.
No, but you've got to look at it from the Dragons' perspective. He's off contract at the end of the year. If you remember early last year, he had an option. I think the Dragons must have had an option on his 2023 services, so they made the decision early in the year to extend that contract and take up the option. I would say because, A, they wanted to give him time to prove himself, they wanted stability in the club, and B, what other options are there in the coaching ranks? We've spoken about this a number of times. So now it's early 2023, and the coach is off contract at the end of the year. Now, the time will come in the next couple of weeks where they go to every press conference and they're going to be asking the question, are you re-signing for next year? And the club's going to get hounded with, what are you doing about the coach? And indeed, they'll have players off contract or players they're trying to sign for future years. The first question they're going to ask is, who's going to be the coach? Now, whether it's Anthony Griffin or, Joe Blow from Urco, it doesn't matter. They've got to be able to provide an answer for that.
But how are they going to provide an answer if they're making Griffin reapply?
Well, because you'll go into the hat with any other contenders that they might have.
When are they going to make the decision?
Well, they could well make a decision in the next few weeks. And they'd have to make a decision in the first few weeks. They're not going to let it go on till the end of the year.
And does that blow?
They've got contracts to extend. They've got players that they want to bring through. They'll have youngsters that they want to graduate through the system. They'll look at their performances over the last couple of years. They haven't played finals football for a few years now. They may well intend to extend him. I don't know. They may be really happy with the way the club is going, but at the moment they're going to make a decision on who's going to be the coach going forward. So I think it's the wise thing to do, rather than just sitting there doing nothing or saying nothing, and doing it behind the coach's back or doing it, trying to keep it out of the media. The minute they start interviewing other people or trying to chase other people, and there could well be other clubs that are in a similar position at the moment, looking for new coaches. And as I say, the list of options is fairly narrow. So St George want to get proactive. I think it's the right thing to do, and I don't necessarily look at it as a negative for the incumbent coach. What they're saying is, we're going to make a decision in the next month about who's coaching going forward. Put your application in; it'll go in with the rest of them. So they're not at the moment where they want to extend him without considering other options. We're going to consider other options. We're not going to do it behind your back. You'll be well informed of who you're up against, and it's up to you. And he's the incumbent. He's the one that can win, 4 of his next 5 and stake a case.
I suppose what I was curious about...
What they haven't said is, don't apply.
Yeah.
It would have been worse if they said, we're going to appoint a new coach the next month, no need to apply. They haven't done that.
So you think that you would anticipate there'd be a decision in the next couple of months on this? So we're going to get to a situation, if Anthony Griffin doesn't get the gig, we're going to know halfway through the season that he's not going to coach them. So they've blown up another year.
It's going to take some time. Now, whether or not they're genuine candidates or not, or it's just the media again, adding 2 and 2 and getting 5 and making up their own list of candidates. And every time we see this, everyone's got a list of candidates. None of those people that they've listed may be even interested.
We'll see Freddie and Billy, their names been thrown in the mix.
Well, everyone will get thrown into the mix eventually, but I'd say the Dragons will target the possibilities. What they haven't said to Anthony Griffin is don't apply. It would have been worse if they'd have said don't apply. The only thing worse than that is don't come Monday.
They couldn't say that to him. What?
The only thing worse would have been don't come Monday, you're done.
Yeah.
So they may well be very happy, but in their own due diligence, given that they've gone through this period without making the 8, and given that they did give Anthony Griffin the 12 months extension on his original deal, so this is his 3rd year. In that 3 years, if we look at the body of work and say, well, what has he done for the club and what's he done for the playing roster and what's he done for performance, is that enough to justify a new contract going forward? Right at the moment, they can weigh that up and then they can say, all right, well, what are our options? Well, let's say those options are right. Ex-players, Ben Hornby, ex-player Dean Young, ex-player Jason Riles. Let's look at their credentials and let's look whether or not we'll be better off with one of those fellas. Are they ready to come into this environment as first-time head coaches and do any better than what Griffin's doing at the moment? I don't know how much work they've done underneath so far as their pathways programs. I see some really good promise in their junior rep programs over the last couple of years, and I'm hopeful that's going to produce. They've got some younger fellas now in first grade that have come through the system over the last 3 or 4 years that they've put in place, so that's a positive.
How long's Griffin been there for? 2 years, and this is his third.
I think this is his third, yeah.
The Dragons improved.
Well, results wouldn't suggest. I think they're a fair side. I've said to you, they won't. Everyone was tipping them to run last. They won't run last. They won their first game comfortably, and.
But running last is not a Dragon barometer, is it?
No, it's not. But the Broncos, their game against the Broncos the other night, that game was in the balance with not long to go. I know it fell away at the back end, but that can happen to anyone. And games aren't easy to win in this competition right at the moment. They may well be happy. And as I say, like everyone said, he's on the outer because they've asked him to reapply. Well, the downside of that is they haven't, or the upside of that, they didn't tell him not to apply. They've told him to apply. So I would imagine he's still in the running.
Hope he knows where his resume is.
Well, until they actually come and say don't come Monday, all's not lost.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It doesn't sound that great, though, I've got to say.
Hey?
It doesn't sound great.
Well, why doesn't it?
I mean, if you said to me, I need you to reapply for your job as host of this podcast, I'd be thinking, oh, shit.
Well, it's something I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, great. I could see that coming. I had some concussion things here. I'm not going to bother. Let's do some Ask Gus. Connor on Twitter. This is really a very well thought out question. Do you think the Cowboys are suffering from their own success? They had 11 top grade players playing multiple games in State of Origin and in the World Cup, plus going deep into finals footy. With a shortened pre-season and a young squad, has this left them underprepared?
Well, you'd have to ask the Cowboys. I don't know. All I know is that last year when they were having that tremendous run of success and they had a brilliant season, all of a sudden the stories come out of the Spartan off-season that they had and running the mountain in the heat there at Townsville. And I often look at that and say, that's great, that's terrific. Can you do it again? Can you turn up and do it all again? Can you get disappointed in the final as they were and miss out on playing in the grand final? And it was a wonderful year and the club and the coach and everyone gets their contracts extended. Okay, can you do it again? Now, representative players and players coming back at different times. And, we're going to talk in detail about this time off that players get in between seasons and different things during the year, which is, there's another subject all in itself. But, it's been a difficult preparation for a lot of clubs and a lot of players leading into this season. I don't think the form or the mixture of form that we're seeing in the first 3 weeks is going to continue. I think our competition will settle down and the cream will rise to the top. And I include the Cowboys in the cream of this competition. But it's whether or not they can go back hand on heart and say, if they compared the two off seasons, the one leading into this season with the one leading into the year before, and they may well say they did. They might even said they went better. I don't know. But I often see that, they'll have that Spartan off season and everything goes really good. And that's the reason why we were great, because we did all this sort of stuff. And it mightn't be the reason at all. That mightn't be the reason for your success at all. But can you go back and do it again?
Yeah. Can
you go back and do it with the same intensity, or are you just replicating it, but just at that little bit less intensity than you had before? And nothing's ever the same. Life's a continuum. You just can't go back, keep repeating things and expecting to get the same results or better results. You've got to keep moving forward. And whether or not the Cowboys have moved forward in that, I think they will. I think they'll be a premiership force in this competition. So I'm not worried about them too all. I just saw you had a trivia question here you didn't ask. Do I want to attend the Masters or the British Open?
Do you want to attend the Masters? I substituted that out when I saw the chip of the shot of your chip.
All right, you're running the show, not me.
Well, which one do you want to go to? Both?
I'm not answering that now. You can ask it next week.
By the way, I called that Cowboys-Warriors game for the continuous call team on the weekend. They were dreadful. The Cowboys, my goodness.
No, well, I thought the Warriors were really good.
Well, the Warriors were good, but the Cowboys, they couldn't catch. They made so many mistakes.
Hot and sweaty conditions. And as I say, they're just out of sync at the moment, which would look to me as though if they went back and compared the two off-seasons, the off-season coming into last year where no one gave them a chance and they were hungry and they were, at the drop of a hat, they were running the mountain in the midday heat and all the things they spoke about and all the adversity they put themselves through and all that. Did they do it again this summer? Did they do it but didn't do it with the same intensity? As favouritism, as performance eaten away at their hunger and their attention to detail. And I think if they sit down, and they'll sit down and have their honesty session in the next couple of weeks. And, they have one loss and they sort of kiss, that's just one of those things. And then it happens again. And then all of a sudden you have a performance like that. And then you sit down, okay, well, you know what? We're not doing it like we were. We're not doing it with the same intensity. We need to concentrate and knuckle down a little bit. That happens to everyone, mate.
He's a clever coach, Todd Payton.
A good coach.
Speaking of that mountain, What did you used to dread in pre-season? Is there a particular pre-season when you? I mean, obviously pre-season is very different. Was there something you dreaded?
We used to have this run at Coogee, all right, and they used to call it the Coogee Run. And for those that know Coogee, there used to be a gymnasium on the North Headland called Giles Gymnasium. It's not there anymore. I think the bones of it might be still there. I don't know.
Jeez, you are old if the bones of it are still there.
Yeah, we used to meet at Giles Gymnasium in that North Park there on Coogee Beach, and you would run down. You'd start there and you'd run down Coogee Beach. I think it was about 7 kilometres, but it was about 15 kilometres hard. So we'd run down Coogee Beach all the way down to the south end around the corner, and there's this set of stairs that just goes straight up.
Oh, that's the famous, yeah.
Yeah, and you'd run to the top of these set of stairs, and you come down the hit, and then you come back down Coogee Beach, and you'd run up Arden Street Hill to the top there, and then you go over Arden Street Hill and up to Clovelly Road, down. Then you turn left at Key Street and go up to...
He still remembers the route.
The Clovelly. I remember every step of it. I remember every crack in the pavement. I remember every crack in the pavement.
Yeah.
I remember every gutter. And you go up Key Street and then you run back down past the Clovelly cemetery up there. It's past the
Did you
Clovelly
think about digging a hole for yourself?
By that stage, you were running on memory. And I was usually running with Daryl Broman and Peter Kelly.
Gussie, let's get a cab.
Then we get to the top of Clovelly Bowling Club, and you come down the hill towards Clovelly Beach there, and then you cut around Clovelly Beach, and then you go around to Gordon's Bay, or Thompson's Bay, they used to call it. And you turn the corner. I remember the first time I turned that corner, think, well, I'm getting close to Coogee, this is nearly over. You know, it was like 30 degrees hot, you know. And you turn that corner, and bang, there's that big hill and that big set of stairs where you climb these three flights of stairs. And then there's another incline that goes to the top, and then you go down into Gordon's Bay, all right, and then turn left there into Gordon's Bay, and you go down the bottom. And the minute you get to the bottom, you turn around, and there's just another big hill. It's the last hill coming out of it. And you come out of that, and you'd think when you got out of Thompson's Bay, the hill had ended. There hasn't. There was just another 80-metre incline. It wasn't that big, but at the end of this 7 kilometres, it was like a monumental. And then you'd roll down the hill, and Warren Ryan would be standing there with the stopwatch. He said, 41 minutes, I could walk around in 41 minutes. I said, I know, I just did. But I dreaded it.
That sounds... Even the description making...
We all dread. I think Jeff Fennick turned up one day when he was at the height of his boxing thing. He ran it with us, and he ran it in like 23 minutes or something. Like he just...
How long did Daryl take?
Head around. I think Daryl even completed the course on a couple of occasions.
He stopped at the fish and chip shop.
Yeah, but we used to pace each other all the way around. I got down to just close to 30 minutes was my best, but I passed out.
That's terrible.
And in them days, when I first got introduced to Newtown, we didn't have hills at Penrith. You know, we knew the Blue Mountains were up there. We knew what they were. Penrith was flat. We didn't have hills. You know, we knew not to go up the mountains. That would be silly. It was the first time I went down and trained at Coogee. We did this Coogee run, and it was. And and Warren bought it to Canterbury, obviously, in those hard years where we won premierships and everything. And it was one of the pre-season things that we did. We used to go there with Newtown, and we'd run this Coogee run, and then we'd go into the Giles Gymnasium, and we'd train with the trainer.
After you run?
After we run, and then we'd have a swim in the ocean. And then we'd go up to the Oceanic pub and drink 15 schooners and so
So that was your reward.
Yeah, I never understood. Whatever good we got out of the run wasn't going to help us after the 15 schooners.
Oh, mate, that's terrible.
Yeah, Les Motto was our conditioner at the time, and we to go back to Giles Gymnasium. There was a boxing room, there was a weights room, and there was an aerobic area. It was around the time that aerobics was just taking off, and he'd get the music out. And
aerobics?
They were
Did you get your aerobics all stock kit on?
And then in those days too, there was no weightlifting. Like the thought back in those early days, weights would make you slow. So you didn't lift weights. Or certainly nowhere I ever went, we lifted weights.
Really?
Warren Ryan was the first one. We used to do some upper body weights in the off season, but you wouldn't do it in the season because it was considered that it took away your skill factor or took away with this. But you know, we learned years later. And my last year of football was with South Sydney, and I used to go and train at 6 o'clock in the morning with Craig Coleman and Mario Fennick and all our forwards. Mario used to make all our forwards come in a couple of mornings a week, and he'd put us through a weight session. And it was the first time in my career that we did weights all the way through the whole. My last year was the first year that we did weights all season.
Right.
And it was one of my better years. And so I went into coaching a couple of years later, and we ended up I think I was the first to get a full-time weights coach, a bloke called Luca Borragini, who was a Commonwealth Games weightlifter and Commonwealth Games coach, and he became our first full-time weights coach in Panthers in 1991, and we won the comp.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that was the history of sort of weights training. But, yeah, the Coogee run was when I went to South that year, and this is obviously was South's success and back in the A's because George Piggins was coaching us. We had this run. I won't remember all the names of the streets, but we started at Giles Gymnasium on Coogee Beach. We ran up Arden Street Hill first, then up Allison Road, all the way up into Randwick, down Avoca Street, all the way down Avoca Street, down, past the Army Barracks and everything to get to the road, what's the main road, Anzac Parade, go all the way down towards Maroubra, down Beauchamp Street, down along Maroubra Beach, right past the Seals Club there, and then we'd come up towards, back up towards the road, and then you turned right, and there was this road called Torrington Avenue, which when you ran up it, right, you were running up it, it was so steep, your knees were grazing on the road, and that was the last, and then you come down, then you go another hill and come down into Coogee Beach, and you had to run it in 75 minutes or less. And I ran it in 74, 72, 68 were my three best. David Boyle used to run it in about 59.
You're a front rower.
Yeah, he'd have had his hamburger and had a shower and gone home before we were finishing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's Millie's dad.
You had to run it under 75 minutes.
Goodness.
74, 72, 68 I think I ran.
That's wow.
And hills and heat. Just terrible.
I don't know why you bloody played.
Well, all them blokes, and I haven't, but all the blokes I played with, Craig, they're all got false hips and false knees, and they trained us wrong in those days. You talk about player welfare. They trained us wrong. Don't drink water.
Who said that?
If you weren't allowed to drink water during a training.
15 scooters.
I can remember as a kid at Penrith, we'd train out there in the evenings. It'd be 40 degrees out there at Penrith. You'd have to close your mouth for the flies getting in your mouth. There'd be bushfires up the mountains. There'd be smoke everywhere. You're not allowed to go near a tap. They didn't have water for you or a Gatorade or anything like that today. Like, we're going to have a drink break every 10 minutes with these blokes.
Why would they do that?
Because you're a cat. You're weak. If you went and had a drink of water, you were weak.
Oh, please.
And we would train for 2 hours in the heat. Honestly, this is how it was back then. Talk about sports science and player welfare.
People not drop dead.
You talk 100%. 100%.
Hey,
You worry about players with injuries and different things today later in their career. Like, the way they trained us back then was the thing. And terrible training regimes. You know, obviously it was character building and toughness building and all of that, but it was Spartan stuff. And, you know, don't drink water, don't lift weights.
Drink water.
Don't drink water. You're weak if you drink water.
Oh, turn it up.
You'd be like going through the desert. You'd be crawling towards the tap.
Hey, a couple of quick ones.
There used to be a milk bar in Penrith I used to go to after training. Remember those? You ever see those squash things they used to put on the counter? Did you ever see those? They used to have the swirling thing inside of it. Would mix the fruit cocktail up.
No.
You never saw it too old. Yeah, back in the day. So
Pick it up and scull it.
Yeah, in the milk bars they had these big glass things with a rotating thing, and they used to break fruit up into it and water, and it used to be they used to call it a cold fruit cocktail drink or something like that. I sat there one night and drank the whole lot. I had about 48 glasses of it. I've never been so dehydrated. But yeah, but all my mates that I play with, they're all getting new knees and new hips and all that sort of thing. I'm lucky. I'm not too bad. I've had 2 back operations, and now I've got to have 3 vertebrae fused. I've just got the diagnosis. I had X-rays in the last week, so I've got to get 3 vertebrae fused, which is why I don't play golf anymore.
No, after your chipping the other day.
And I'm very sore today after playing golf yesterday.
It's just a couple of quick ones because I've got to get into this preview. But on the back of what you just said there about debilitating heat, should they have played on Sunday?
Oh, mate. It's been my bugbear. You worry about player welfare, then we ask them to go out and play on that. No, and our reserve grade played before that.
Well, that's dumb, isn't it? Like, really? How hot would it have been for reserve grade?
Well, it's at least 40 out there.
That's crazy.
Disgraceful.
Where's the RLPA on that?
Yeah. Let's have a talk about the RLPA one day.
Right.
I'll tell you what they don't do.
Frank Panisi from Melbourne says the NRL's got to increase squads from 30 to 38 because of the concussion protocols. Yes or no?
It's going to have to be 58 if they keep going the way they're going. We'll talk about that down the track too.
6 tackle trivia. John Sattler, the great late John Sattler, captained South to premierships in 67, 68, 70 and 71. That's good going. Who was a South premiership winning captain before him?
I think that's a trick question. Who put the question? I think that's a trick question.
It's not a
because
trick question.
because most people would rush in and say Clive Churchill, but I don't think Clive Churchill played in the grand final in '55.
It is not Clive Churchill.
No, I know. I don't think he played. I think he missed. I think they won it in '54, '55, and I don't think Clive Churchill played in '55. And it might have been even a captain coach, Jack Rayner.
Correct, Gus. This is unbelievable. You're killing the six tackle trivia this year.
Well, you keep going back to the 50s and 60s.
Jack Rayner. Yeah, I'll give you something from yesterday.
Yeah, I can't remember where my car keys are, but you know.
Okay, round 4 coming up. 3 from 8 last week.
A lot of upsets last week.
Wasn't there? Thursday,
could have been 6 from 8 very easily.
Yeah, I know. It could have gone either way, a few of those games. I don't think I went much better than 3 from 8 last week. In fact, I've started a tipping competition with my eldest son, Samuel, who's become increasingly interested in the game. Jacob, my youngest, loves it, but Sam is more interested in competing with his dad, and he's beaten me the first 3 weeks. So that's how good I'm going.
It's a dad's job.
Thursday, 8 p.m, grand final rematch. Eels 3.20, Panthers $1.35 on BlueBet. The odds correctors of 9 o'clock Wednesday the 22nd. Combank Stadium. Panthers off the bye. Eels get Ryan Madison back.
Yeah, I think we'll see a similar result to the grand final last year. I think Panthers will be too good for them.
Friday footy, the early game, 6 p.m. in Melbourne. The Storm $1.30 with Cameron Munster back against the Tigers $3.55. Now, I don't know how they trained in the off-season, but Tim Sheens has changed the whole team in the 4th week of the season. They've got Brandon Wakeham playing 5'8". Moses is still at halfback. They moved Adam Dewey to fullback.
Storm.
Okay. The game everyone's looking forward to, the new Battle of Brisbane. You'll see it here live and free on 9. Kick off 8 p.m. Coverage from 7:30. That's Eastern Daylight Saving Time. When's Daylight Saving finish? Is it after Easter weekend?
First weekend of April, I think.
Dolphins $3.40 with no Felice Kafusi, who went to the judiciary and got rubbed out for 4 weeks.
I think Broncos will win very comfortably. I think it's great for the game, though, the crosstown rivalry. And as I said on 100% footy the other night, we should have another team in Brisbane just to keep these two honest as well. I think competition is good for the Broncos. Our game should never have allowed the Broncos the monopoly they've had in that area for that long and to resist another team coming in. And I think the Dolphins are a great acquisition to the competition, but that won't help them this weekend. I think the Broncos will be too good.
What about Payne Haas at the end of that game? 18 all. He comes back out, and he had a few mates, of course, but he dead set destroyed the Dragons.
Well, he had a 30-minute break.
Yeah.
He had a long spell for Payne Haas. Normally he plays a lot of minutes, but he did, and he.
Oh, that's an interesting. That's an interesting little point. That might be the new recipe.
He had a big spell before he came back the second time.
Mate, didn't he? He scattered him.
The game was over in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
it was all over.
That's very.
I always thought they were going to win, but he sort of helped them along that way. Yes, I think Bronco too good there.
All right, 5:30 Saturday, another Queensland showdown up in Townsville. $1.50 for the Cowboys on BlueBet. Titans, who were good last week, and a shootout really. I mean, their defence isn't that great, but they outpointed Melbourne. They're $2.60 outsiders. Cowboys very ordinary last week. Titans coming off winning form, and there's 2 for Asur Mala'awis for us to deal with now.
Yeah, well, look, this is potentially another upset because the Titans have got points in them, and at the moment the Cowboys are struggling for that. It's really easy to tip the Cowboys and say they'll bounce back, but you've got to believe your eyes sometimes. And, you know, as you say, Warriors handled them pretty comfortably last week. It's potentially an upset. If the Titans had a greater commitment to defence, I would be tipping them. I don't know whether or not. I'll say Cowboys. I think that's the safer way to go, but I'm not confident.
Saturday evening, 7:35 p.m. at Accor Stadium in Sydney. The game will pay tribute to John Sattler as South Sydney take on Manly. The Rabbitohs are $1.60 favourites, but they have got so many missing in the pack. Up against Manly, who opened... Now, I reckon they were about $2.70 at the start of the week. They're now $2.35, and they've got pretty much everyone intact. I know there's the emotion etc. But they are very depleted in the forwards, the Rabbitohs. So they've lost. Hame Sele is out again, and Totola's gone again.
Yep. Again, without great confidence, but I think Manly might be too good here. I'm going to back the Cherry Evans-Trbojevic combination over the Cody Walker-Latrell combination.
Hame Sele failed the HIS, so 11 days he's out. Oh, the other one's Shaquai Mitchell. So he needs surgery, doesn't he?
Yeah.
What's the Liz Frank? Is that what it's called?
That can be a bad one. That can be 12 or 18 months. It's a bad injury. Because,
what is it?
Well, it's a bone and ligament in your foot, but it gets very little blood supply. I'm not a doctor, but this is what I've understood. Yeah, it's the one that Ray Fatala-Mariner had and New Brown had, where the recovery can linger on. In the end, we had to get Ray Fatala-Mariner a bone graft to fix it. But what I understand, though, and it's only been in the last off-season, is the people that have been dealing with these injuries for a number of years, there's a new surgery that they do, and where it used to be quite a long recovery and with no definite recovery period, because it just varies in people, the amount of blood supply that gets to this area, it gets no blood supply.
Right.
And it can be a very difficult injury to recover. They believe they've got this new surgery which can get them back in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. Now, I haven't seen evidence of that yet.
Crikey.
And they've performed that operation on Luke Thompson, who did a Lisfranc ligament and some fractures in his foot, and they're hoping to get him back in 14 weeks. But I can't imagine Shaquille getting back soon. It's going to be quite a lengthy time on the sidelines, unfortunately. Oh, look, I think Manly's form is a little overrated, but so too was South Sydney a little bit, and it fell apart the other night. As soon as Gerard Warrior came on the field, the Roosters were just too good for them. And look, not with a great deal of confidence, but I think Manly are way over the odds, which everyone picked up early on in the week, and they've been backed into more believable odds at the moment.
All right, one of the most competitive, probably the most competitive game of the weekend as far as BlueBet goes anyway. Warriors, Bulldogs, Mount Smart Stadium in Auckland. Warriors $1.85, Bulldogs $1.95. Toss of the coin. They've been pretty impressive. They've been plucky, the Warriors, haven't they?
Really
There's been a
good.
bit of fight in them.
Really good. And the Bulldogs are without 5, now 6 of their front rowers for this game leading in. So they've done a really good job to do what they've done. But if there's one club you don't want to be playing without big muscle up front, it's the Warriors. So it'll be a tough road trip for them this weekend.
Where's Tavita Pangai? Is he close?
No.
Oh. Fair enough.
So with Tavita, because Tavita's had a recurring calf issue for a lot of his career in recent years, he's had a recurring thing. It's not... Each individual injury is not a major thing, but the fact that it's recurring now has become an issue. He did his calf muscle in January at training. They thought he'd be back for the second trial game. In that week, he did his calf muscle again, but when they x-rayed it, it was a different part of the calf muscle. It's never really the same part of the calf muscle. So we've sent them to some experts, and they've done a whole clinical analysis of his anatomy and his movements and why it happens and weaknesses and strengths and what's causing it. And the idea is that we want to eradicate it forever. So it's not just about getting the calf muscle ready for him to run. It's so that it won't reoccur. And there's been a whole body alignment study done, and it's quite intricate now, sports science and how they do it. But he's undergoing a very specialised form of training under some very, very talented people.
Right.
John Lang's son, I think, Justin Lang,
Lang.
heads up the team there, and they do wonderful things with him over there. And I've seen video of him doing great things. I say, gee whiz, he looks ready to play. I say, yeah, but he's not ready to get re-injured. He can still be re-injured. So I think his recovery this time will be longer because it's kind of like, well, we want to prevent the next one, not just cure this one. We want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because it's become a bit of a problem for him. So
to the folk at NRL.com who said he's back next week, he's not. I've just read it here. He's a week away.
Eh?
The NRL briefing says he's a week away.
Well, I hope they're right, but that's not the information.
And
it may well be right. I don't know, but as far as I'm unaware, it's indefinite at the moment. So
they're big calves. There's a hamstring specialist. Is there a calf? So you've got a calf specialist too.
Any muscle in your body, mate, we'll find you a specialist.
Yeah.
I don't know about the way you think about your golf. I've got no brain specialist for you.
Oh, mate, forget about that. Forget about it.
Your problem is the mental game, sir.
That and hitting the ball. That's a bit of a sore point at the moment. Sunday footy. Newcastle, $2.90 at home to the Raiders, $1.41. Now, there's a stack of changes for Newcastle again. The one that springs to mind is they've dropped Dom Young. I mean, he couldn't catch a cold last week. Greg Marziu comes in, the man mountain. Leo Thompson goes from lock to prop. Jack Hetherington to the bench because Kurt Mann is back. But Josh Papali'i returns for Canberra. Very short in the betting, the Raiders. Newcastle, though, as we know, have been knocked around early.
Yeah. I think the Raiders are deserved favourites and they can win away from home. Good win for them against the Sharks last week. Did really well.
And to round out round 4, the Derby, Dragons... Red V Jubilee, $2.50. Sharkies, $1.53, but the Dally M medalist Nico Hines returns for Cronulla.
Yeah, that's a big in, isn't it? A little disappointed in the Sharks last week.
Yeah.
I thought they would handle the Raiders, but they didn't. And I know they were very disappointed in themselves, not just in the football, but maybe some attitudinal things that need a shift. Dragons... good win first up. They were solid against the Broncos for 70 minutes last week. That game was in the balance. I just think the Sharks might have a little too many points in it for them, so I'll go with Shark in the local derby. So I'm going Panther, Storm, Bronco, Cowboy, Sea Eagle, Bulldog, Raider, Shark.
Yes, a few away teams this week.
Yeah, if I'm asking for my confident ones, I think Panthers will win. I think Storm will win. I think Bronco will win. I think they're the 3 best and probably Shark, the 4th best.
All right, there you have it. That's how
the rest are all in the balance.
Yep. That's our look at round 4. Obviously a lot to get through today, and we started on a very sombre note, and we will end...
How long was that today? That was a long podcast,
about 3 hours. But that's okay. The punters love it. If you get caught in peak hour traffic, coming in or out of work, as I may have today, an hour and a half podcast would suit you perfectly.